most people, when we say Afro-American, they think only of the Negroes in the United States, but they don't realize that 2/3 of Brazil consists of people of African blood, which means they're also Afro-American because Brazil is in South America. And in all of these, many of these countries in South America and Central America, and even in Canada, they are heavily populated with people whose ancestors came from Africa. So when you total up the number of Afro-Americans, real Afro-Americans, in the Western Hemisphere, there are perhaps 100 million. And if these people ever unite among themselves, not only is it necessary for the Afro-Americans in the United States to be organized, but it's also necessary for the Afro-Americans in the Caribbean, or the Afro-Cubans, the Afro-Brazilians. It's necessary for all of them to be organized. And then once they are organized in each place, we have to organize among ourselves so that the Afro-American in the United States will be working in conjunction in a coordinated program with those who are in Cuba and those in Brazil and those in Venezuela and those throughout the Caribbean and Haiti and in the West Indian Islands. And in this way, we actually get strength. And it's not an accident that there's no organization existing in the Western Hemisphere that's designed toward that end. It would be a direct threat to imperialism as it really exists and to colonialism as it exists in the West. And one of the things that's going to help to bring this about is the independence of Africa. One of the only reasons that we in the West have never organized, we have hated our image and our African image. And because Africa has been in the hands of people who have created an image of Africa that's negative and hateful. And it has been hateful to us. We haven't wanted to identify with it. But now that Africa is getting independent and in a position to create its own image, and it's a positive image, those of us in the West look at the African image and see how positive it is. We begin to identify with it. We become proud of Africa, and we become proud of our African blood, our African heritage. And this is what is beginning to make the Africans in the Western Hemisphere today develop more race pride. And as this race pride develops, then it has a tendency to make us want to unite together and work together. And your Western imperialists and colonialists consider this to be a grave threat, more threat than communism or Marxism or socialism or anything else. The Africanism is what they consider to be the real threat.
Yes. African Americans who are so-called Negroes. One of the reasons that it is bad for us to continue to just refer to ourselves as so-called Negro, that's negative. When we say so-called Negro, that's pointing out what we aren't, but it isn't telling us what we are. We are African, and we happen to be in America. We're not American. We are people who formerly were Africans who were kidnapped and brought to America. Our forefathers weren't the Pilgrims. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock was landed on us. We were brought here against our will. We were not brought here to be made citizens. We were not brought here to enjoy the constitutional gifts that they speak so beautifully about today. And because we weren't brought here to be made citizens today, now that we've become awakened to some degree and we begin to ask for those things which they say are supposedly for Americans, they look upon us with hostility and unfriendliness. So our unwanted presence, the fact that we are unwanted, is becoming magnified in all of America's preachments today.
Tend don't worry. Uncle Justin live life, prosperity, and health as spoken in the ancient Kemetic language. Hotep means peace, Rastafari, African power for all African people. Kings and queens, blessings. Thank you for joining me. This is Tafazwa Shakara Bandaka live and in session. Let's give me some nines in the chat. Let me know that you can hear me quickly. You know what I'm saying? I also want to make sure my voice is coming through loud and very, very clear. Just let me know you can hear my voice loud and clear. You know what I mean? Coming through. Give me some nines in the chat or some red, black, and green that some of you have already done. I give thanks for all of that. You don't know. yeah, it's love kings and queens, you know. We're feeling it right about now. And yeah, it's going to be a good one today, you know what I'm saying? Stay tuned for anyone who wants to join this particular conversation. You will be given an opportunity to do so. You will be given an opportunity to do so a little bit later on. And yeah, I'm going to begin by giving a bit of an introduction to why we're here. This topic right about now, you know what I'm saying? What's wrong? What's wrong? What is wrong with being African? You get me? What is wrong with that? We want to know today. Yeah, what's wrong with being African? You get me? That's the levels right about now. Yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna be going through some stuff, including doing a little bit of a presentation in a set, you know what I mean? And we're gonna get into some things. All right, I want to share some information with the family, you know what I'm saying? And let me just you get me, like turn on my camera for a bit so heads can, you know, have a bit more of an interactive experience. All right, okay, all right, family, blessings. Yeah, so we're gonna go in. All right, so why am I doing this particular subject right here? The reason is because for the last couple years, there have been a number of movements out here recently that have kind of challenged the foundation of African identity. Yeah, kind of challenged the foundation of African identity. And so now some of these things are basically, well, I'd say it started a few years ago with this anti-Hotep vibration that kind of started kicking up, say about 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah. And ever since then, there's been a rise in, like, you know, I'd say in chronological order, I'd say the Black Hebrews, which they've been there for a long time still, but there's a particular, and I want to make this clear, where the Black Hebrews are concerned, Hebrew Israelites, not all of them are in the category that I'm about to mention. Yeah, big up to Abba Ben Ami, you know what I'm saying, who departed us a few years ago. But you know, the African Hebrew Israelites would not qualify for what it is I'm about to say. But there are many groups, yeah, that consider themselves Black Hebrews that are very hostile towards Africa, African identity, and things African. Yeah. And then following that, now you had this whole pop up in the last year or two of the Aborigine movement. Yeah. And basically these are Black people around the Americas, because at one point I thought this was just the United States of America. I was wrong. Yeah, I learned that this was going well beyond that. Yeah, so and it's in the Caribbean as well, but they don't believe that we are African, that we come from the African continent, and these things. Yeah. And then recently, yeah, sorry, these people believe that we are the indigenous people of the Americas. And in interacting with some of them, I came to observe that it wasn't just that they thought that we were this like original to the Americas. Yeah. All of us, you know what I'm saying? Like, well, it's original to the Americas. There's again another particular kind of hostility towards Africa and a rejection of African identity, yeah, that I found, you know, proliferated through what, you know, their whole philosophy, their whole ideology. Do you know what I'm saying? So yeah, that I found particularly interesting. Then, in the last year or two, also, it's been the African descendants of slaves, African descendants of slavery. And again, this whole narrative that rejects African identity, whilst acknowledging that we have an ancestral connection to Africa, but for some reason, the idea that we have an African identity is abhorrent to these people for some, you know, whatever reason. And in that respect, there is a narrative that begins with the idea that our brothers and sisters on the continent sold us into slavery, that is designed to sever us from experiencing and being allegiant to an African identity. Yeah. So, you know, going through, seeing all these dynamics, and I'm thinking, but the commonality between all of these things is a rejection of African identity, yeah? And coming with this narrative is, oh yeah, I forgot to say, Kings and Queens, do like out the video, you know what I'm saying? You know, do want to call house cleaning and everything there. Do like out the video, share the link and all these things, and I mean, share it far and wide. Yeah, you know, I didn't even promote this one as much as I promote my other ones, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, share out the link, family, share out the link, you know what I'm saying? Big up to my people in the chat. Big up to I Love Soil, Do You? Big up to Sister Yemaya, you done know, sis. Blessings, good to see you. Kaz Rudy is in the house. Kojo, the African, bless up, my brother. I'm gonna read your comment in a bit, yeah. I'm gonna read your comment in a bit. All right. And I believe Sister Melanated and Belize Bang is also in the house. All right. Yes, family, share up the thing and like up the video as well. Make sure we can spread this African energy all about the place, all through the land of YouTube and the World Wide Web. Yeah. So what was particularly apparent to me when I look at all of these things that I've just mentioned is that the actual rejection of African identity was not necessary. Yeah. It didn't bear any relevance to whatever identity that they were trying to assert. Yeah. Except for the fact that they would be challenged by people who would say that they're African. And then they could just have a conversation about whether or not they're African. But there's a particular kind of hostility, yeah, to the African identity that, to me, is coming from somewhere else, yeah? You have narratives associated with this then that try to paint those who affirm an African identity as living in some kind of utopia, harping on about outdated political ideologies, not having a political ideology and being engaged in kind of self-aggrandizement, feel-good cultural nationalism and these kinds of things, yeah? So just meditating on this, yeah, I figured, well, what's wrong with being African? And so I figured to just do a little session on this whole concept of an African identity and where it comes from, and the purpose it has served, yeah, in Black, you know, culture, Black politics, Black economics, for the last few hundred years. Where does it come from? Yeah, because one of the things that is also apparent within all of these narratives is that they never give a proper appraisal of this. Yeah, they never give a proper appraisal of this. You hear statements like, well, the white man named us African. And these, which is not true, this is what I'm saying. So, and then all of this effectively is designed to delegitimize the idea, the mission, the goal, the ideology of Pan-Africanism, because Pan-Africanism asserts a oneness of identity among African people across the diaspora. Pan-Africanism asserts a cultural unity, yeah, of African people across the diaspora. Okay, and so we're gonna go into this a bit right about now, and yeah, so I'm gonna share my screen, and hopefully everyone can see it. So when I share my screen, family, I'd like for you to just do me a favor and let me know that you can see it. Yeah, hit the 9 button when I share my screen, and just let me know so you can see when I try to show you. All right, we're gonna go in right about now. So right, let's get this, set up this thing nice and easy. Once again, whilst you're here, if you're just coming in, welcome, welcome, welcome. Do hit the like button, share the link, you know what I mean? Share the link, and I will be facilitating a conversation after I've just gone through, you know, a few points of history, historical, cultural reference for us all. And yeah, I look forward to you joining me in the conversation in a bit. Right, let me share up the screen, little piece, so you can see where I go on. Popcorn, share screen, right, yeah, share the thing, you know, share up the thing. Okay, so now we'll share up the thing. Yes, family, just hit the 9 button for quality control so I can make sure that everybody can see where I go on. Hit the 9 button for me, family, if you can see my screen, so that I can make sure that everything's running nice and smooth. Yeah, give thanks. My brother M.A. Brown is in the house. Blessings, brother. You get me? Yes, I. All right, we're gonna go in. Yeah, so I'm just gonna deliver some information here that pertains, yeah, to the historical relevance of the African identity, yeah, in today's world, what it means, yeah, how it came about, and the purposes, because all identities are designed to fulfill a particular purpose. So we're going to go into that right about now. I'm keeping it very short. I'm not going to do my usual definition of this and definition of that, because normally what I do is define identity and, you know what I'm saying, explain what that is and what it means and the implications of identity in the social structure, formation of society, subculture, and all these things. We're gonna bypass all of that and leave that for another presentation. We're just going to go through briefly some historical points. Yeah. So really what I'm doing here now is just demonstrating where the term African begins to be used, yeah, specifically in the English speaking world, okay, and in what context it begins to be used. Now, according to most historical records, this is the first point at which Africans begin to self-define as African. What's important to know at this particular juncture is that the number one terminology used to refer to African people, black people during this time is Negro and nigger. Yeah, so we wasn't really referred to as African at this point, but the continent of Africa was referred to as Africa. Okay, so we have here Ignatius Sancho, yeah, 1729 to 1780. Okay, so we're not even dealing with the 1800s yet. This is the 18th century. Okay, and he is believed to have been born, yeah, on a so-called slave ship traveling from Africa to the West Indies. He ends up in London, in fact, in this country that I now sit in, and he begins to start writing. Yeah, he is in some kind of business in the city of London. He begins to start writing letters, yeah, and these letters were compiled into a collection and published in a book called The Letters of the Late Ignatius Sancho, an African. Okay, and the reason why it was titled that, yeah, is because when he wrote letters, he used to sign his letters off an African or Africanus, yeah. So he used to identify himself with Africa and Africanness and African identity, and used to write in a favorable way about Africa, even though he had never really been there. Yeah, and this is the same for Phyllis Wheatley now, who during this point, well, obviously she's born into slavery 1753, and she begins to start writing poetry. Now at this point, the America, there's no nation called the United States of America. It's a colony of Britain, yeah. And so this is the reason why these two are kind of simultaneous with each other, because they represented the axis of the British Empire during this period, and so their literature, the things that they wrote, proliferated around the empire, became known throughout the empire, so she begins to start writing poetry. And her book, of collective works, poems on various subjects, religious and moral, was published in 1773. Again, same, commonality. Yeah, she refers to herself as African, and the race Afrique. Yeah. Or the sable race Afrique is a term that she uses, and she also is also referring to Africa in a positive light, and somewhat contradictory, because she was indoctrinated into slavery and so believed that kind of Christianity was a saving influence upon herself and Africans in general. But still, this was the first time that white authors were experiencing Africa and Africans being written about in a positive light, especially because it came from Africans ourselves, and people who had been taught that Africa had no history and had nothing to offer the world. Yeah, moving swiftly on, one of arguably the first actual black activist organization to have developed in the UK is the Sons of Africa, yeah, which was founded, among others, by Otaba Kugwano and Olaudah Equiano, yeah, both Africans who had European names but asserted and affirmed an African identity, one, through the reclamation of their names, and two, through referring to themselves as African. Okay, both these individuals would refer to themselves as African. Olaudah Equiano is another one who would sign off his letters and refer to himself as an African. And I'm not going to read through all the notes on here, but note the name of the organization, the Sons of Africa. These are two Africans from West Africa, yeah, and are beginning to they set a trend in terms of forming an organization that identified with the entire continent. Okay, the entire continent, and also were affirming an African identity. So we're going to get from here on. I'm going to be a little bit more detailed, yeah, just a little bit more detailed. This is a brother by the name of Richard B. Moore, and yeah, he is an activist born in the late 1800s, and so he's an activist. He becomes a member of a number of Black nationalist organizations, and he also joins the Socialist Workers' Party, but is actually kicked out because he's a bit too Black nationalist. He's also a member of the African Blood Brotherhood, which is a contemporary organization to that of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League. Yeah, and so, you know, though a Black nationalist, Richard B. Moore also is a bit of a critic of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. And you know what I mean, but you know, somebody who's committed to the uplift of Black people and African people in general. He's also, well, let me come back to what I was just about to say. All right, this is reading from a paper that he wrote in 1963 called African Consciousness in Harlem. He's dealing with the history of Africans identifying with an African identity. Yeah, he says consciousness of their ancestral homeland has thus been historically evident from the first arrivals, when some of these Africans brought as slaves into the Americas killed themselves, believing that they would thereby return to Africa. The most famous incident of this is known as the Igbo suicide something or another, but a group of Igbo Africans on a ship being brought from Africa basically mutinied on the ship, took over the reins of the ship, and you know, basically kill off all of the crew, and instead of being enslaved, yeah, when they met up on land, they all just collectively just walked into the sea and drowned, yeah, because they refused to be enslaved. And so that's just actually one story, one particular incident, yeah, like this, because you know, we hear of others. We hear of the stories of Africans just throwing themselves overboard, for example, and these kinds of things. But going on with this particular article, awareness of their heritage, of culture and dignity continued during the colonial period and the early days of this republic. Yeah. So now we're going into from now the last quarter, yeah, of the 1700s. So we're going from the transition of America being a British colony to the American Revolution and the organizations now that African people in America began to develop. The name African was then preferred and used instead of the slave master's degrading epithet Negro. Witnessed thus the Free African Society, founded in Philadelphia. This is the forerunner of the African Protestant Episcopal Church of St. Thomas, which is in the Caribbean. Also the American Methodist Episcopal Church. Note also the African Lodge of Prince Hall Masons in Boston. African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, which is different now from the African Methodist Episcopal Church. African Society for Mutual Aid. African Grove Playhouse in New York. And many so named throughout the country. Yeah, so what begins to happen is that not just in the United States of America, but throughout the Americas, yeah, you begin to see the development, yeah, of Black organizations starting to flourish, yeah, at the end of the 1700s, or should I say in the last quarter of the 1700s. So this is now the first period in which Africans are forming official organizations, yeah, in the Americas as a part during the enslavement experience. Okay, and so we're talking about not just what would become the United States of America. We're talking about the Caribbean as well, noting that a lot of these churches, especially the Baptist ones, linked up throughout the Caribbean and North America. Yeah, so even as far as Canada, these organizations were being developed. The important thing to also note is that these are all developing independent of each other, so they're not related. Yeah, one of them is not necessarily catching inspiration from the other, except for the fact that there is speculation as to the degree to which the writings of Phyllis Wheatley, Olaudah Equiano, Ottobah Cugoano, and Ignatius Sancho had proliferated the Americas in terms of African people during that time. There's speculation. Nobody actually knows the extent of the influence. Yeah, but for you know, to all intents and purposes, most of this is taking place independently of each other. So what's happening is that when these Africans are developing organizations of political, economic, and social uplift and spiritual ritualistic experience, noting that all of these things are not necessarily separate and distinct from each other. Yeah, so the church was also advocating on behalf of African people and trying to liberate, abolish slavery, working for social, economic, and political uplift. Okay, so then these are not all mutually exclusive ideas, and as far as these organizations are concerned. But as soon as we start to self-organize, the identity that we adopt and affirm is African. Think about that. Yeah, this is before the American Revolution now. Yeah, so there's no a self-defined, affirmed identity called American as yet. Not to say that there's no white people in America affirming Americanness at all. My point is that among Africans, even as white America was self-affirming as American, black people in America and throughout the Americas were self-defining as African. Okay. Richard B. Moore goes on as early as 1788, an organized body of Afro-Americans, and note the use of this word. This article was written in 1963, yeah? And Richard B. Moore is noted as being one of the earliest proponents and advocates of the terminology African-American and the rejection of just American or Negro in particular, yeah? And even black, he wasn't even fond of the use of the term black to refer to Africans, yeah? So note the use of this term, Afro-Americans, yeah? So this is being used already, okay? In Newport, which included Paul Coffey, who was soon to make history in this respect, wrote to the Free African Society of Philadelphia proposing a plan for emigration to Africa. What he means by Paul Coffey making history in this respect, Paul Coffey is noted as one of the first Africans to actually take Africans back to Africa. And we should note that thousands of African men, women, and children made the journey back to Africa, repatriated back to Africa between the and throughout the 1800s, thousands and possibly tens of thousands. Okay, right. So moving on now, 1787. Yeah, Prince Hall, who is the founder of one of the aforementioned organizations, which is the African Masonic Lodge. Yeah, presented a petition to the government of Massachusetts, Boston, Massachusetts. Yeah, which is said to have been presented by a number of African blacks. Yeah, of the Masonic Lodge, and it reads thusly: "We or our ancestors have been taken from our dear connections and brought from Africa and put into a state of slavery in this country." Let me pause right there. Let me pause right there. Why am I pausing? When he says we or our ancestors, I want to emphasize the fact that when he says we, he means that there are people among this group who were not born in the Americas, but were born on the African continent. There are people among this group who have knowledge to memory of the African continent. Yeah? So I'm emphasizing that because many people believe that this identity of African is exclusively the domain of Africans who were ripped from Africa and had no knowledge of it and in an attempt to define themselves with no knowledge of the continent, yeah, they come up with this African thing. No, this was the definition that was coined, yes, and affirmed by Africans who were born on the continent, yeah. And so if they're affirming this African identity collectively because they understand that they come from different parts of the continent, but they're affirming a collective identity. Well, I'm going to go on, we're going to come back to that in a second. All right. From which unhappy situation we have been lately, in some measure delivered by the new constitution, which has been adopted by the state or by a free act of our former masters. That's what he's referring to there. Is obviously the success of the American Revolution in 1776, yeah, from which unhappy situation, yeah, we have been lately in some measure, he says, delivered by the new constitution, which has been adopted by the state. And what they basically mean is that obviously the American Constitution, the American ideal was that all men are supposed to be created equal and free, and land of the free, home of the brave. All these concepts are floating in the air. Some Africans were promised to be liberated, free, made free, if they fought on behalf of both sides of the fight, to be honest with you, the British side and the American revolutionist or Republican side. And to some degree, some of that did take place. Some were able to quote unquote buy their freedom and whatever else like that. Yeah, that's what he means by this. Okay, yeah. So or by a free act of our former masters, but we yet to find ourselves in many respects in very disagreeable and disadvantageous circumstances. Most of which must attend us, so long as we and should be our children live in America. So basically what he's saying is, all right, there's some modicum of, you know, freedom of one, you know, as post 1776 than there was pre-1776, but still we're in disagreeable and disadvantageous circumstances. Yeah, they go on. This and other considerations, which we need not here particularly mention, induce us earnestly to desire to return to Africa, our native country, which warm climate is much more natural and agreeable to us, for which the God of nature has formed us, and where we shall live among our equals and be more comfortable and happy. That we can be in our present situation, and at the same time may have the prospect of usefulness to our brethren there. Right. Again, I want you to note, one, the affirmation of African identity, the collective tie to a group of ancestors, yes, and the unified commonality that is being shared in terms of common experience, yeah, common history, and common destiny that is being affirmed by this particular petition. Okay. Also note that in the affirmation of African identity, this is actual activism that is going on. So the two examples that we have so far, when Africans are affirming African identity, they're not just doing it just to feel good. They're not just doing it because it makes them feel nice and to hold on to an illusionary utopian ideal of what Africa means and represents. This is them affirming an African identity for the purpose of enacting what they consider to be a liberation or freedom agenda on behalf of Black people. Let's move on. This leads us humbly to propose the following plan to the consideration of this honorable court. The soil of the native country, Africa, is good and produces the necessities of life in great abundance. There are large tracts of uncultivated lands, which, if proper application were made of them, it is presumed might be obtained and would be freely given for those to settle upon, who shall be disposed to return to them. When this shall be effected by a number of Blacks sent there for this purpose, who shall be thought most capable of making such applications and transacting business, then they who are disposed to go and settled there shall form themselves into a civil society united by a political constitution in which they shall agree. So what they're proposing is that they have organized a group of people that are willing to go to Africa and, you know, basically check out the terrain, see what opportunities are over there for the Africans in America. Yeah, come back, make whatever arrangement needs to be made over there, come back, get the rest of us so that we can go. Yeah, but they're affirming this because they want basically self-reliance in this process. Okay, they want to enact self-reliance in the process. They're saying we're going to control the process by which we move from Yassa to Dessa. Yeah, all right, but these must be furnished with necessary provisions for the voyage and with farming utensils necessary to cultivate the land and with the materials which cannot at present be obtained there and which will be needed to build houses and mills. What you've just read, or what I have just read there, is defined as reparations. That is part of a reparations claim. We're going to move. You have disenfranchised us in America. You must therefore enable us, yeah, with the provisions that we need to travel over there, even as we control the process via which we go over there. Return to Africa, that is. Okay, now we're going to move on to Martin Delaney. All right, Martin Delaney, here's a few facts. Again, this is a man born in the United States, but his maternal grandparents are Mandinka in the Niger area. His paternal grandparents are from Gola people from Liberia, what is now known as Liberia. He wrote The Condition, Elevation, Emigration, and Destiny of the Colored People of the United States, Politically Considered. It was published in 1852. The word African, yeah, is regularly used in this document to refer to black people. The word African is regularly, yeah, not sometimes, regularly used in this document to refer to African people. So again, he's a feminine African identity, but note that the title of the paper, The Condition, Elevation, Emigration, and Destiny of the Colored People of the United States, Politically Considered. Yeah. In it, he proposes that African people should migrate to Central America, yeah, and build up a nation there. The whole point is about developing an African or black nation in the Western Hemisphere, and basically leaving Outer Babylon, which would have been considered the United States at that time. Okay, I should just note here, it's not in the presentation, but this has a point. David Walker. David Walker's appeal, yeah, was also another document that could have been considered here, which was published in the 1830s. But he also affirms a collective Black and African identity in that document. Martin Delaney spent 9 months. He actually traveled to the African continent and spent 9 months there meeting with indigenous chiefs across West Africa. Signed an agreement with 8 chiefs in the Abeokuta region in Nigeria, allowing repatriates to live on unused land and use their knowledge and skill for the community good. We're going to come back to that, so stay tuned. But I'm also going to quote something from another of Martin Delaney's papers or essays entitled The Political Destiny of the Colored Race on the American Continent. Yeah. Right. But big up everybody in the chat. Big up everyone that's just joining the thing. Big up my brother Kemo. Blessings, my king. And you don't know. Yeah, like up the video, family. You know what I'm saying? If you're not doing that, and feel free to share the link far and wide. Right? Quote from Martin Delaney. He says, "Let it be understood as a great principle of political economy that no people can free themselves who themselves do not constitute an essential part of the ruling element of the country in which they live. Whether this element be founded upon true or false or just or an unjust basis, this position in community is necessary for the personal safety, for their personal safety. The liberty of no man is secure who controls not his own political destiny. What is true of the individual is true of a family, and what is true of a family is also true concerning a whole people. To suppose otherwise is that delusion which at once induces its victim through a period of long suffering patiently to submit to every species of wrong, trusting against probability and hoping against all reasonable grounds of expectation for the granting of privileges and enjoyments of rights which will never be attained. This delusion reveals the true secret of the power which holds in peaceable subjection all the oppressed in every part of the world. A bit of context here. At this point, what's taking place is that there's a debate going on among Africans in America. Yeah. And on one side, there's Martin Delaney. The two most prominent figures, as history would have it, is Martin Delaney and Frederick Douglass. Yeah. Both great men. All right. Both great men. Okay. We're not taking anything away from Frederick Douglass, even as we affirm the principle of Martin Delaney at this moment in time. Yeah. But following 1776 and the American Revolution, obviously, because of the more Africans begin to be enticed into what is called you know, an American identity, especially because there's a number of quote unquote free blacks who are looking for concessions and attainment and affluence within American society. And the other side of this is saying, now, bun that, we're not even looking for that. We're looking for our own independent nationhood. Martin Delaney is one such leading this charge. David Walker, who I previously mentioned, was another such leading this charge. So I'm just giving you the context here through which Martin Delaney is speaking. So when he talks about hoping against all reasonable grounds of expectation for the granting of privileges and enjoyment of rights, yeah, which will never be attained, he's talking about ingratiating oneself with the American system and what it means to be American. Let us be clear. All right. I mean, my brother Scattered, announcing your entry because you don't know you're a Dun Gargan. You know what I'm saying? You're allowed to do that, my brother. You get me? Welcome. You know what I'm saying? Can get started right now, you know. When Scattered Minds reaching the place, things can really get started. You know what I mean? All right. He goes on. A people to be free. Listen to this. A people to be free must necessarily be their own rulers. That is, each individual must in himself embody the essential ingredient, so to speak, of the sovereign principle which composes the true basis of his liberty. This principle, when not exercised by himself, may at his pleasure be delegated to another, his true representative. I'm going to go on. To be successful, our attention must be turned in a direction towards those places where the black and colored man comprise by population and constitute by necessity of members the ruling elements of the body politic, and where, when the occasion shall require it, the issue can be made and maintained on this basis, where our political enclosure and national edifice can be reared, established. Oh my days, forgive me for the spelling mistake, I can't remember what this was supposed to be, I apologize. And proudly defended on this great elementary principle of original identity. Original identity, where our political enclosure and national edifice can be reared, established, and proudly defended on this great elementary principle of original identity. Upon this solid foundation rests the fabric of every substantial political structure in the world, which cannot exist without it. He's talking about original identity here. And so soon as a people or nation lose their original identity, just so soon must that nation or people become extinct. Powerful though they may have been, they must fall, because the nucleus which heretofore held them together becoming extinct, there being no longer a center of attraction or basis for a union of the parts, a dissolution must as naturally ensue as the result of the neutrality of the basis of adhesion among the particles of matter. Yeah. So what he's affirming here, what he's affirming here is that the basic principle for nation building is identity, and what he calls original identity, more specifically. So Africans, therefore, must build and develop according to an original identity, which he is affirming and others are affirming as African, which is the collective expression of the various peoples from which we come on the continent. Yeah, the experience that we carry, having been trafficked across the Atlantic Ocean, yes, understanding also that those cultures become unified, so to speak, in a unified expression most naturally. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit, kings and queens. All right? Okay. We're going to go on just to explain a few things. Right. Search for a Place. This is a book written by Martin Delaney and Robert Campbell. Yeah, these are the two brothers who actually went on this expedition to West Africa. Okay, and whilst they were in Nigeria, they met with a number of chiefs of the Yoruba nation, specifically of the Egba subgroup, and they actually wrote and signed a treaty. All right. And the first article of this treaty, they went on behalf of a group called the Niger Valley Exploration Party, and this treaty was signed in 1860. In fact, it was signed in 1859, but was published in 1860. Article first, that the king and chiefs on their part agreed to grant and assign unto the said commissioners on behalf of the African race in America the right and privilege of settling in common with the Egba people on any part of the territory belonging to Abeokuta not otherwise occupied. Yeah, this is now the agreement, the first article of agreement between the Niger Valley Exploration Party and the Egba chiefs and kings. Article second, that all matters requiring legal investigation among the settlers be left to themselves to be disposed of according to their own customs. So they're just asking for some space and leeway to manage their own matters among themselves. Yeah? And this was agreed to. Article third, that the commissioners on their part also agree that the settlers shall bring with them. Yeah, so this is what the Africans from the Americas now are promising to bring with them to what later became known as Nigeria. Bearing in mind now, there is nothing called Nigeria at this point. Nigeria is not a thing, yeah, at this point. But African identity and the desire to develop African nationhood is a thing. Okay? All right. Nigeria would not become a thing until 1914. Okay. And I should also point out at this point that Robert Campbell is actually born in the Caribbean. Yeah, he's actually an African from the Caribbean. Okay, so it's an African from the United States and an African from the Caribbean. All right, right. So let's bring with them as an equivalent for the privileges above accorded. So basically, they've been granted land. Yeah, what they're gonna bring in exchange for this land is intelligence, education, and knowledge of the arts and sciences, agriculture, and other mechanical and industrial occupations, which they shall put into immediate operation by improving the lands and in other useful vocations. What is the context for this? The context for this is thus. Read Walter Rodney's book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Yeah. And he outlines the systematic way in which the colonizers disenfranchised our people on the motherland from the necessary preparation to be masters of our own destiny. Yeah, deficient education just as much as it will allow European nations to rob and benefit off the extreme mineral wealth, yeah, of the land and these kinds of things. So this is what is meant by underdevelopment. Now, obviously, at this point, America, yeah, is trying to fuel what is called an industrial revolution and them kind of things there. So there's a lot of skilled labor in the Americas. There is much skilled labor from Africans in the Americas, and not to say that there's no skilled labor in Africa now, but this is what the Africans from America are promising to bring to you know, this land, yeah, among the Eba people, in reflection of the fact that they are being granted land. Article 4, which is the final article, that the laws of the Eba people shall be strictly respected by the settlers. These are the Africans coming from the Americas. And in all matters in which both parties are concerned, an equal number of commissioners mutually agreed upon shall be appointed, who shall have power to settle such matters. Yeah. So now they're just promising basically to abide by the laws of the Eba people. Okay. All right. These are the names of the people that signed the treaty. As a pledge of our faith and in the sincerity of our hearts, we, each of us, hereunto affix our hands and seals. This 27th day of December, Anno Domini AD 1859. Yeah, family. These are the names of the people that signed the petition. Okukenu Alaka, Samoye Ibashorun, Sokenu Balogun, Ogunbona Balogun, Atambala Balogun, Ogunseye Anaba. This name, it was at least my pronunciation, you know. And Tabo Balogun Ose, Ogundemu Ageoko, Martin Robinson Delaney, Robert Campbell. Okay, all right. Moving forward, Kings of Queens. So that's what happened there. I should just give you the end of the story here, in the sense of the fact that what happened is the colonial authorities, because bearing in mind now that the British were, you know, already in this area fighting wars with people and trying to annex off land. Yeah. The Berlin Conference would take place 20-something years later, but there's a lot of wars all throughout the 1800s. The 1800s is littered with colonial wars, yeah, where Africans, this is the period of what is called a scramble for Africa. Okay. And so there was a lot of manipulation going on. The colonial authorities got involved with the Eba chiefs in order to thwart the program. And what happens also is that the American Civil War begins to kick off, yeah, in America. And so because and a law is passed that allow, and I'm forgetting the name of this law, you know, forgive me, but it allows the American government, yeah, to basically kidnap, quote unquote, freed slaves and reinstitute them back into slavery. And so Martin R. Delaney considers it his duty to stay and fight on behalf of the African people there. The Civil War kicks off, and he fights in the Civil War as well, you know, against the South and these things. Yeah, but all of these things are him trying to defend African people in that respect. And so those two events, the colonial annexing of West Africa and the Civil War in America, kind of thwart this kind of whole program. But Robert Campbell does actually move back to Africa, and he moves back to Lagos. He takes his family and moves to Lagos. Yeah, but the whole entire program doesn't you know, take place. And yes, thank you for that, Terry. Yes, you are correct. there's also warfare between Islamized Africans, yeah, and traditionalists, yeah, because during this time, in fact, it is said that the majority of people that converted to Islam in West Africa actually converted in the 1800s, although Islam was present long before the 1800s. But, you know, like somewhere between half and probably more than half of the population in terms of like the numbers of Muslims, yeah, in West Africa kind of came around during this kind of period, okay? So thanks for that reminder, Brother Terry. All right. One of the founding fathers of black nationalism, Edward Wilmot Blyden, and I'm taking a bit longer than I should, so I'm going to move a bit faster. All right. Just a few points. So he actually moved back to. He's born in the Caribbean, St. Thomas, and he moves. So this is now not America now. This is the Caribbean. Okay. He moves back to Africa, and he lives between Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Nigeria between 1885 and 1912. 1912 is actually the year that he died. Yeah. And he is another one of the founding fathers of black nationalism and Pan-Africanism. Some of his written works, A Voice from Bleeding Africa, African Lives and Customs, which is a book in which he is giving an appraisal of African culture or cultures, comparing it to European culture to the benefits of African culture. So he's comparing European culture, African culture. He's saying African culture is by far the more advanced, when all things are considered. Okay, when all things are considered. And Christianity, Islam, and the Negro race. This is a book in which he gives an appraisal of Christianity and Islam in relationship to Africa and African people. He's a Christian now, and he gives Islam the benefit of the doubt. So he comes to the conclusion that Islam is a more beneficial religion, and I'm going to give you some insight into how he comes to that conclusion shortly. Right, quote from Christianity, Islam, and the Negro race. He says, the African view, once again, note that the African of the universe is based upon the truth that man, nature, and the universe and God are in harmony. There is no alienation. Yeah, the basic morals of human action are cooperation, peace, and building great projects. These are diametrically opposed by the European worldview, which sees man as alienated from God, at war with nature, and surrounded by an indifferent universe. Yeah, so he's given an appraisal once again of African culture. Now, the reason why I say I'm going to give an example, an insight into how he comes to this conclusion, is because this is in the book Christianity, Islam, and the Negro race. And if anybody that understands African spirituality will know that what he's defining there is an African spiritual worldview. It is not an Abrahamic religion worldview. And I'm not at this point seeking to detract from the conclusion that he came to. There are good reasons, from his time for the next 100 years. There are many Africans who came to the conclusion that Islam was a better religion for Africans because it had an older experience and presence in the on the African continent as far as West Africa is concerned, and had gelled into the culture of the people much more than Christianity had. Or Western Christianity had at that particular moment in time. So there are good reasons for why he comes to that conclusion. I'm only making a point here that what he's describing here is an African spiritualist view. Yeah, because anybody that has heard anybody debate or speak to a Muslim before will tell you that this idea that God is a part of his creation and there's no alienation between it and them kind of things there is taboo. Yeah. For all of the Abrahamic religions. Okay, I'm just making that point. All right. For us, he goes on he says, sorry, in the next thing now, this is a lecture to the Young Men's Literary Association in Sierra Leone, May 19th, 1893, and it was recorded in the Sierra Leone Times, yeah, May 27th. For every one of us, there is a special work to be done, a work of tremendous necessity and tremendous importance, a work for the race to which we belong. It is a great race, great in its vitality, in its powers of endurance, and in its prospect of perpetuity. There is a responsibility which our personality, our membership in this race involves. It is sad to think that there are some Africans, especially among those who have enjoyed the advantages of foreign training, who are blind enough to the radical facts of humanity as to say let us do away with the sentiment of race. Let us do away with our African personality and be lost, if possible, in another race. This is man speaking in 1893, and just clock how pertinent and relevant them words are for us today. But the term African personality is a term that Edward Wilmot Blyden is credited with coining, okay? But at this point, Kings and Queens, we've gone from the 1700s to the late 1800s now. This is over 100 years of Africans affirming an African identity for the sake of liberating African people. I want to make that very clear, okay? Right, what of on the continent? Because man, somebody in the audience right now, the viewing audience right now is saying, yeah, all right, Shakara. All these Africans, yeah, from the Caribbean and the Americas and blah, blah, from West Africa. What were the Africans on the continent saying about all of this? James Africanus Horton, author of the African's View of the Negro's Place in Nature, author of A Vindication of the African Race. Note the dates, 1865, 1868. Yeah, James Africanus Horton is born in what is now known as Nigeria. He spent some time living in another nation, I believe it's Sierra Leone, yeah, in West Africa. And he was not born with the name Africanus. He actually adopts the name Africanus. So if you Google him, you will probably just see Africanus Horton, yeah? But he is credited with being the father of Pan-African thought, yeah? Intellectual thought in West Africa, okay? Because he was writing these documents during this time. So he condemns racism. He condemns racism much. So he even writes about, in A Vindication of the African Race, he writes about racism in the Americas. He's advocating for independence and self-government and African nationhood, yeah, on the African continent. And in fact, I believe he's one of the earliest to have considered affirming the concept of African nationality. Yeah, that is a term that he used. Okay, just presenting some other names who were present at this time. Most of these are in West Africa. J.E. Casey Hayford, Adelaide Casey Hayford, Ghana and Sierra Leone respectively. Yeah, but they are forerunners, 1800 philosophers in Pan-Africanism. John Mensah Saba, Mojola Agbebi, don't worry, I'm going to come back to him, and Deuce Muhammad Ali. Deuce Muhammad Ali is from Sudan and Egypt, okay? Not going to go into all these names, kids, because we're just throwing it out there, because I do want to open up the conversation shortly. Ethiopianism is another concept that through which people were affirming an African identity. Now, this is predominantly East and Southeast Africa, yeah? In Lesotho, in 1872, 150 Africans renounced French missionaries, giving birth to the Ethiopian African Church movement, yeah, in Southern Africa. Reverend Mangena Maka Mokone broke away from the Methodist Church and formed the Ethiopian Church of South Africa in 1892. Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, yeah, who's one of the leading members of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, visits South Africa in 1898. The point that's being made here is that, okay, so first of all, Psalm 60, I believe it is, Ethiopia shall stretch forth her hands unto God, and princes shall come out of Egypt, yeah, becomes a psalm of inspiration for an entire movement, yeah, to revolve around the concept of Ethiopianism. Ethiopia coming to be known as a name, a synonym for the continent of Africa. Understanding that the nation we now call Ethiopia is then known as Abyssinia. Okay, so Ethiopianism is an African liberation movement. All right, being pushed through the church, okay? And this quote from a book by the name of Pan-Africanism, A History by Professor Hakeem Addy says, Ethiopianism in South Africa, as well as elsewhere, was also clearly a manifestation of wider social and political unrest and was associated with the slogan, Africa for the Africans. I forgot to mention earlier that Martin Delaney is the individual credited with coining the phrase, Africa for the Africans. It was also used by Edward Wilmot Blyden and was popularized by the prophet Marcus Messiah Garvey, with the addition, those at home and those abroad. But the phrase, even before Garvey now, the phrase Africa for the Africans is associated with the Ethiopian church movement in Southern Africa. Ethiopianism in South Africa was strengthened by the outbreak of the Second Boer War and subsequently considered a contributory factor to the 1906 Zulu Bambata Rebellion in Natal. This rebellion also led to one of the earliest Pan-Africanist texts, hear it now, A Defense of the Ethiopian Movement, written by Bandele Omoni, 1884 to 1913, a young Nigerian student based in Britain who ended his short life engaged in politics in Brazil. Nigerian student writing a defense of the Ethiopian church movement in Southern Africa, and ends his life politically engaged in Brazil, which is the most populous nation in the Western Hemisphere as far as African people is concerned. Okay, all right. Majola Agbebi. Forgive my spelling mistake there. Jeez. All right. Founded the Native Baptist Church in 1888 and the African Baptist Union of West Africa. Born David Brown Vincent, he reclaimed his African name. So he threw away a European name. He was born with the name David Brown Vincent. And this African, who was born in what would later become known as Nigeria, that's where the European name. That shit where. Fling it where. And reclaimed the name Mojola Agbebi. Yes? Agbebi promoted the development of a church governed by Africans. This is his own words now. Worked by Africans, supported by Africans, minus the tremors, complexion, and domination of a foreign and alien race. He's a churchman. Last year, the first. Inaugural, this is a speech that he delivered at the inaugural event of the United Native African Church in May 1882. Y'all ain't hear what I'm saying. You never heard what I just said. But Brother Majola was also famous for making statements like the European church is dangerous, as far as Africans are concerned. We're nearly there, Kings and Queens. We're nearly there. So I've skipped a whole lot. I've just jumped through a whole heap of history to get to Marcus Messiah Garvey. Just noting the name, the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League of the world. The term African is used again. We're gonna jump again. We're gonna make another jump. And just deal with how Africanness is affirmed in the independence era. Our independence is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of the African continent. That's the Saja for Kwame Nkrumah. There is a new African in the world. This is a speech that he made during the inauguration of the independence of Ghana. Patrice Lumumba said similar words. We are going to show the world that what the black man can do when he works in freedom. And we are going to make of the Congo the center of the sun's radius for all of Africa. So all these people are coming with not just a regional kind of nation state consciousness. They're coming with a Pan-African, all African consciousness. Finally, we're going to end with the great Omowale Malcolm X and the program of the Organization of Afro-American Unity and how they were addressing issues of identity and the African liberation fight. Establishment. Having stated our determination, now bear in mind, this constitution, or well, not quite constitution, it was the program and also known as the aims and objective of the Organization of Afro-American Unity. Yeah. A lot of history that's there that I won't go into, except to say that this was modeled after the Organization of African Unity on the continent, because he was seeking to join the liberation fight on the continent and unify Africans throughout the Americas now, not just in the United States of America, but throughout the Americas, yeah, to fight for our liberation and join our brothers and sisters in that liberation fight. Okay. Leading members of the Organization Afro-American Unity are Omowale Malcolm X, importantly his sister Ella Collins. Yeah, not enough of us know about Ella Collins, but she is the big sister of Omowale Malcolm X, his biggest supporter, and one of the leading members. In fact, when he was assassinated, she actually took over the leadership of the Organization of Afro-American Unity. The person, however, responsible for actually penning the aims and objective is the great and illustrious historian Baba John Henrik Clark. So these words were written by Baba John Henrik Clark as a result of the consultations and the decisions that were made by the leadership of the OAAU. Establishment. Having stated our determination, confidence and resolve, the Organization of Afro-American Unity is hereby established on the 15th day of February 1965. In the city of New York. Upon its establishment, the Afro-American people will launch a cultural revolution, which will provide the means for restoring our identity, that we might rejoin our brothers and sisters on the African continent culturally, psychologically, economically, and share with them the sweet fruits of freedom from oppression and independence of racist governments. In order under the point of restoration, yeah, in order to enslave the African, it was necessary for our enslavers to completely sever our communication with the African continent and the Africans that remained there. In order to free ourselves from the oppression of our enslavers, then, it is absolutely necessary for the Afro-American to restore communications with Africa. We must begin to re-educate ourselves and become alert listeners in order to learn as much as we can about the progress of our motherland, Africa. We must correct in our minds the distorted image that our enslaver has portrayed to us of Africa, that he might discourage us from establishing communications with her and thus obtain freedom from oppression. Under the point of reorientation, Malcolm X, you know, and the way how I love this man, yeah, and the way how I love what he was doing, what he was leaving us, yeah, before he was assassinated. Yeah, this makes you, it always leaves me in a state of wonder as to what would have happened had he lived, or had the organization had a stronger foundation at the point at which he was assassinated. But that's another subject for another time. In order to keep the Afro-American enslaved, it was necessary to limit our thinking to the shores of America, to prevent us from identifying our problems with the problems of other people of African origin. This made us consider ourselves an isolated minority without allies anywhere. Yeah, I'm not breaking all this down, you know, Kings and Queens. I'm hoping that you're actually listening and identifying the points of relevance as to how this relates to today. Yeah, the conversations that we're having today, the debates that are going on today, the attacks against Pan-Africanism and African identity that are taking place today. Okay, and when I open up the lines, you can share your perceptions. The Organization of Afro-American Unity will develop in the Afro-American people a keen awareness of our relationship with the world at large, and clarify our roles, rights, and responsibilities as human beings. We can accomplish this goal by becoming well-informed concerning world affairs and understanding that our struggle is part of a larger world struggle of oppressed peoples against all forms of oppression. We must change the thinking of the Afro-American by liberating our minds through the study of philosophies and psychologies, cultures and languages that did not come from our racist oppressors. Under national concerns, general terminologies, we actually goes into a they go into a an explanation of breaking down the term Negro and why it's deficient. And so at the end of this, they affirm the identities that they are affirming, yeah, as Africans in America and throughout the Americas. He says, we accept the use of the term Afro-American, African, and Black man in reference to persons of African heritage. To every other part of mankind goes this measure of just respect. We do not desire more, nor shall we accept less. This is the African self-defining. Nobody now gonna tell we, oh, we for define. Yeah. And I should also clarify that the term Afro-American, in one of his last interviews in 1965, he's interviewed by a group of Congolese students, yeah, and he gives, and I played this actually at the beginning of the video today, the session today. For those who missed it, he's explaining that the fact that the term Afro-American, and he does also use the term African-American, does not just relate to Africans in the United States of America. He's referring to Africans throughout the Americas. Yeah, so all the continent of North America, yeah, which is Canada, United States, Mexico, Central America, South America, and the Caribbean. But he also goes on to explain that he's also referring to Africans in Europe, because many of the Africans in Europe by this time are migrating from the Americas. Yeah. So he actually forms a branch of the Organization of Afro-American Unity in France, for example, and attempts to do so in the UK when he travels here also. Okay. All right. Big up my brother from Belize in the house. You don't know. One of the strongholds of the Garvey movement, Belize. I mean. Right. Couple more slides. Worldwide concern. The time is past due. You know, I'm gonna skip this slide for the sake of time. Yeah. No, in fact, let me just read the last part. Our relatives who are in the majority or in their own country have found it very difficult to gain independence from a minority. It is that much more difficult for Afro-Americans who are a minority away from the motherland and still oppressed by those who encourage the crushing of our African identity. So for the Africans, the Black nationalist Africans who are organizing this, they are seeing the affirmation of an African identity as one of the tools, one of the fundamental tools. They're reinforcing what Martin Delaney was saying almost a century prior about affirming original identity. Yes, as a tool for waging a liberation fight. And because they're seeing it as the American government establishment deliberately tries to crush the affirmation of an African identity. So they're affirming one in relation to liberation. Last slide. This is not in the program now. This is a quote taken from that interview that I was referring to earlier. He's explaining the impact that the independence movement on the African continent is having on Africans throughout the world, and the impact of a positive image of Africa and what that does in terms of inspiring Africans to organize among each other. He says, as that race pride develops, it has a tendency to make us want to unite together and work together. And your Western imperialists and colonialists consider this to be a great threat. More a threat than communism or Marxism or socialism or anything else. Africanism is what they consider to be the real threat. So basically, kings and queens, what I've done, yeah, for longer than I expected to, is just given over 100 years, yeah, of the affirmation of an African identity as self-defined by African people as an act of liberation, political, economic, cultural, and spiritual ascendancy, yeah, as opposed to this self-aggrandizement, feel-good factor, and utopian, unrealistic dreaming. I hope I have made the case very, very clear. I hope I have made the case unequivocally. And I do hope that ones and ones will be inspired to join me in the conversation right about now. And feel free to share your thoughts, your feelings, your reflections on what it is I have shared. All right.